I don't think it's going to be something that happens from a Friday to a Monday. So I wouldn't necessarily equate the departure of our forces in July, August, or by early September with some kind of immediate deterioration.
The truth is, this did unfold more quickly than we had anticipated.
We're breaking down the political fallout from America's rapid withdrawal from Afghanistan and the Taliban's takeover of that country. The Trump administration negotiated an agreement with the Taliban.
Afghanistan, how about that? Worse than Afghanistan, where, by the way, I started the process, all the troops are coming back home, they couldn't stop the process.
The Biden administration came into office with a decision about whether to honor that agreement or continue the fight against the Taliban. So no matter who had been elected in 2020, American troops were coming home from Afghanistan. Both Trump and Biden wanted that to happen. There really was not much of a debate or a constituency in America for a continued occupation of Afghanistan. The administration believed there would be a lot of time to negotiate with the Taliban, to figure out how a post-American occupation of Afghanistan looked, and facilitating the details of getting U.S. allies out of the country. Americans were not prepared for the speed at which the Taliban zoomed across the country and entered Kabul and caught an American administration flat-footed. In his address to the nation, he stood firmly behind his decision to pull the remaining troops out of Afghanistan. He also pointed the finger at a number of other people and institutions. He blamed the fall of the Afghan government on the Afghans themselves. He also put blame on President Ashraf Ghani, who fled the country over the weekend.
Mr. Ghani insisted the Afghan forces would fight, but obviously he was wrong. We gave them every chance to determine their own future. We could not provide them was the will to fight for that future.
Biden's speech was partly to respond to a chorus of criticism, a kind of firestorm in American politics and the press that the Biden administration has not dealt with in its 7 months in office. But let's break down sort of the spectrum of criticism. There are essentially 4 categories of criticism if you look at this closely. The first category is a lot of bad faith criticism on the right, people trying to use this strictly for political purposes.
This president confronted a challenge in Afghanistan. He has utterly failed.
The second source of criticism that Biden is experiencing is people who want to stay in Afghanistan.
What we're seeing now is a policy that will ensure that we will, in fact, have to have our children and our grandchildren continuing to fight this war at much higher cost.
Another group, and this is probably the bulk of the criticism, these are folks who are not focused necessarily on the fact that we are getting out of Afghanistan, but the execution.
In many ways, I think of John Kennedy and the Bay of Pigs. It unfolded quickly, and the president thought that everything would be fine, and that was not the case. But President Kennedy took responsibility for what took place. And I strongly recommend to President Biden that he take responsibility.
And what has notably been the smallest camp are the pure Biden defenders. More than anyone, the Biden administration has been defending themselves.
I stand squarely behind my decision. After 20 years, I've learned the hard way that there was never a good time to withdraw U.S. forces, and the buck stops with me.
It's often difficult when you cover these things with your nose pressed up against the glass to know if you're watching something that is going to define this era of politics, define the Biden presidency, or frankly, it's going to be something that will be off the front pages in a few weeks. And there are probably a few issues that will determine which way this goes. The first is the evacuation effort. We're not witnessing mass casualties of Americans, which is the most important thing to the American public and will determine the politics of this.
I was asked to authorize, and I did, 6,000 U.S. troops to deploy to Afghanistan.
Ironic, considering that the whole point here was to pull out 2,500 troops. But these 6,000 troops have a mission now of securing the airport in Kabul, identifying refugees who the United States wants to get out of the country. White House officials tell us that once this gets up and running, they will be able to get 5,000 people a day out of the country. There are all sorts of estimates about how many people will be eligible to be evacuated. I've seen numbers as high as 80,000 people. And there's a real pressure on the Biden administration to sort of reduce the bureaucratic process of who qualifies to get out of the country or not, and just airlift as many people who want to get out as possible, set them up somewhere safe, and deal with the processing after the fact. The second thing that will probably determine the long-term political impact, what does this new Taliban government look like? How does it treat its population? How much does it reverse the liberalizing impact of the Western occupation and the Western-backed government that was there for years? How much they reverse that will we watch very closely. How they treat ethnic and religious minorities will we watch very closely. That will be part of the Biden legacy here when and if the subject of who lost Afghanistan becomes important going forward in American elections. What matters to most people is, are Americans dying in a foreign war? And that's not going to be happening in Afghanistan anymore. And I think the Biden administration's bet, just as the Trump administration's bet, is that that is politically much more important and on their side.